Welcome to TEPSA Talk, the podcast where leaders inspire, share, and grow together. TEPSA is dedicated to celebrating the incredible work happening in education. Each episode, we dive into meaningful conversations with leaders, change-makers, and innovators who are shaping the future of our schools. Whether you're looking for fresh ideas, encouragement, or a little spark to fuel your passion, TEPSA Talk is here for you. Imagine tuning in to hear how leaders are revolutionizing their schools, tackling challenges head-on, and fostering a culture of collaboration. Grab a coffee, hit play, and let's grow together. Welcome to TEPSA Talk.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the TEPSA Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Todd Nesloney, the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership here at the Texas Elementary Principals and Supervisors Association. Every week, we bring you different guests from around the world to share their expertise, and I am so excited about this week's guest. TEPSA member, former administrator, queen of all things, Valerie, introduce yourself to our listeners today.
So much for that sweet introduction, Todd. Hi everyone. I am Valerie, born and raised in Corpus Christi, Texas. So excited to be here and share a little bit about what I do. Served in public school education for 12 years as a teacher, instructional coach, and administrator, and came over to the business side of education about 3 years ago. Worked for Director of Partnerships for an SEL company, and now I work for a nonprofit company called Thinking Nation that creates supplemental curriculum that aligns literacy and social studies. So also in my downtime, I am currently finishing up my doctoral degree at TAMUCC. And really looking at Latinas and how they lean into their culture and how that impacts their leadership style. So a little bit about what I do.
Love it. Valerie, okay, so I know we're talking about supporting instructional practices and things on today's episode, but I definitely want to ask about your dissertation too and your doctoral work. So don't let me forget to dive into that. And so today's conversation is all about us as leaders supporting our teachers in their instructional practices. And this is something that you have been passionate about for quite a while. And, as an administrator, there's a lot of things on our plate. And when I meet different administrators and when I think about myself, there's different things that we all consider our strengths and our weaknesses. When was instructional practices something that you really wanted to dive more into and become an expert at or become even stronger at?
Yeah, sure. So, when I started teaching, I definitely was one of those late comers. So I got my first job at 29 and, raised my daughter, sent her off to school. Well, didn't raise her, but she was 5, old enough to go to school. So then I went into school and I just really started asking questions, a lot of things that we don't learn, in going into school
Right.
to be a teacher. And my second week of teaching, for the very first time, my principal said, not everybody's doing what you're doing. I think you need to be a principal. And I just thought, what are you, I just got here. And he said, no, not everybody's doing what you're doing. So as I went for my master's degree and then became an instructional coach, it was at that time that I joined a campus that was being reconstituted. So really, TEA took over, and it was in that moment that I was analyzing data in a way that I had never analyzed data before. And so while we definitely don't want to tie students to scores, which is something that, we would just take off all of the names and just look at the scores, because we didn't want to have any, misconceptions about, this student is this student is that. We just wanted to look at the data. And then we became very intentional as teachers, as a staff. We were unpacking standards and then realizing that, oh my goodness, we are not teaching what the students need to know at the end. We're kind of teaching everything else but, like I say, the meat and potatoes of it all. And so it was definitely, I was forced into that kind of thinking, but I will say it changed me forever. And then, had the opportunity to work with Steve Ventura, who is somebody I also do some PLC work, consulting work on this, in addition to, like I said, my free time, right? And, he has really he was talking about the different ways to really look at data and ask ourselves those right questions, right? Are we teaching what the students need to know at the end? And really reflecting and looking at ourselves. So, that year we ended up closing a lot of gaps, in looking at our professional learning communities and what do those norms and standards and protocols look like, in being very intentional about what teachers are doing. And then what are we doing in the meantime, right? These students understood this concept and these students didn't. What are we doing for the ones that did? What are we doing for the ones that didn't? And are we being intentional about those strategies and really aligning those strategies to the standards that they're not doing well in? Or are we just kind of trying to figure it out? And so I think that that's where data really allows us to be very intentional about those processes. And then as an administrator allows us to go into those classrooms and look for those aspects that we talked about, aspects of teaching that we talked about in the PLC.
I love all of that you shared. And I'm thinking, like, if I'm a school administrator listening to this today going, yes, Valerie, I agree with that. I agree with that. But Valerie, like, I got all these subject areas that I'm responsible for as an administrator, and I may not have taught all of them. And so I want to support their instructional content. I want to give them good practices. But Valerie, I don't know where to start. What is your advice for an administrator, where to begin when they want to be more instructionally knowledgeable for their staff?
I mean, I am definitely an ELA girl through and through. And so, like, working in my current job as director of partnerships for Thinking Nation, we're social studies, but we align with literacy. And so I think what it comes down to is being present, being a part of those conversations in PLCs, because best practices don't change. When I did 10 years when I was in public education, serving students in elementary for 10 years, and then shifted to middle school, everyone thought, what are you doing? And I remember thinking, I want a challenge. I want to see something different. And I thought, gosh, but I've never, really taught just, one core subject, like some of these teachers have. And so getting in there, what I learned was that best practices did not change. They definitely translate from kinder all the way to high school. And so I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is to, like I said, be in those PLCs, understand those questions, right? We can all look at a standard together and unpack it. What does unpacking mean, right? We're looking for that end in mind. What is that verb? What do we want the students to know? And that's what we're asking. Then we're diving deeper and saying, okay, how are they going to do that? And there's so many strategies out there and resources with, what are the best instructional strategies. I know we have a repository that allows teachers to say, like, if these are the standards that they're not doing well in, here are some of the best practices that you can utilize in your classroom. And then if you don't know how to do it, we're going to show you. So there's a video and there's a step-by-step. So I think that that's the first thing. That's the second thing. And then I think the third thing is, administrators need to monitor and adjust, what it looks like. But also the fourth thing, support. And monitoring and adjusting comes from going into the classroom and looking at walkthroughs. We can't look at everything. I remember when I looked at the evaluation form, I thought, oh my gosh, how do you want me to look at all of these areas in 10, 15 minutes? There's no way. So what I did was, for teachers, we just focused on one thing that we were going to look at for those 2 weeks. And then we were rotating between principal, assistant principal. So maybe for this section, we were just looking at those learning goals, those learning targets. What were those going to be? Were they on the wall? If we talked to the students, were they able to tell us what they were doing? Those are all important things that you can do and do within a short period of time, right? And then if they're not, then coming back to those PLCs that you're meeting weekly or bi-weekly and saying like, how are we adjusting instruction if we're not doing that? Or what support do we need to give you? And then, I think that that's really what can really help administrators, keep a good pulse of what is actually happening without having to learn the content area, but definitely leaning into those best practices and being visible.
Yeah, I thought there were so many good things you said there. And as an administrator who may not bring as much instructional strength to their area, because we all have different strengths and weaknesses, I think that if you're that kind of administrator, being present, like you said, in those planning conversations, asking questions, why are you doing this? What are you doing this? Where do you need support? What resources can I bring in? And knowing the resources that are available for you to go and pull from and say, oh, this has clearly been a constant reoccurring issue where y'all keep bringing this up, that this is a weakness of y'all's. I'm, as the administrator, going to go find a support for y'all. Or I'm going to go help get this for you. And I want to educate myself in this area. I think, like you said, just being present and asking those questions. Now, you bring that instructional coach background, the educator background, the administrator background, and now the third party background. And so what do you see as like one of the pitfalls to avoid when trying to support your people? Because from that instructional coach and that administrator perspective, you can sometimes step over the line of support. So what's a pitfall we can avoid as administrators when we really want to support our teachers instructionally?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question, Todd, because as I meet with people, from across the country and even outside of the country, I have come to be validated in a lot of the things that I was struggling with, as a teacher, as a coach, and as an administrator. I'm like, okay, it wasn't just me. This is happening all the way in Canada, So, so that's the first thing. But the second thing I always say and reflect on is, man, if I had an opportunity to go back into a school, I would be so much better. Only because I have just such a different perspective. And in that, I think when you're in the thick of it, it's very hard to see past those walls or those fires, that you're just constantly feeling like, you are putting out. But I would say, to avoid those pitfalls, it would definitely need to be going into it with this type of lens. Understanding that it's not for teachers not wanting to do something. It's a lot of the times it's lack of them understanding what they need to do. And I think if we all go into it with that coaching mindset, then it allows us to really put our guard down as a professional and say, like, we're all here to do what's best for kids, and coming to the center of that. And so if we are looking at it through that lens, then I think that it really allows us to have those open conversations where no one is guarded in that moment, right? We're all coming together for the sake of the students.
I love that. And I think sometimes we do come to those meetings with you should know better, or you should have already known this. And the reality is sometimes they're not doing it because they don't know really how to do it, or how to do it well, or how to add it into the 1,000 of other things that they're already doing. So I love that. Okay. I know we're going to shift gears a little bit, but I've got to ask about your doctorate work. So I love that is your topic. So I know you're in the thick of all the research and all of the writing and all of that. So what do you say is one of the biggest things you've learned during your doctorate work?
Because now I'm in chapter 4 and 5. So God willing, I'll be graduating this December and defending in October, November. And so I will say that the most important thing is that I have learned, which is probably something that, I would say is always said, but it's relationships. It's really getting to understand those students that you are leading, that you're teaching, that you're supporting, and that community too. I mean, so many of those aspects that we bring inherently into just who we are as people are with our kids and with our teachers and with our community. And if we, I may not be teaching, a group of students, that are all Hispanic like me, right? But whatever culture they might be, I need to lean into that. I need to try to understand that, and see, one, if is there any commonality here, and if not, that's okay. Be able to really understand, like, what are some things that make them who they are? What are some things that are inherent parts of who they are, and what makes them them. And I think that, through my conversations that I've had, so many of us as leaders carry that, whether it be stemming from our culture or, even how we were raised in our household too. And so I think it's important to understand that we are all coming from different backgrounds, different cultures, and that's what makes us so great, right? Like, that's what makes it so fun to get to know somebody. I'm starting to grow into, loving who I am, in my 40s. But what I will say is that wasn't always the case. And I think that, the people that have really taken time to get to know me, to get to know why I think how I do, why I, am who I am and do what I do, have really, made an impact on me, and, just where this journey of life has taken me. And I think that that's so important for us to do for our kids, to really just get to know them and see and value how unique every single person is. Because if we met people that were exactly like us, I think that would be boring,
I agree. But I love that it sounds so simple, but it
Mhm.
is so deeply true
Mhm.
that all these experiences, these cultures, these differences bring us together, and they're so beautiful when you embrace them and when you get to know them. And that's what I love about so many of our schools, is just a wide variety of students that we serve, and that when you really jump into their cultures and their backgrounds, and you celebrate those pieces of them, it brings everybody closer together. And I love that your work has been in that too, and that you've learned yourself through that experience, because I think that's been great as well. Well, Valerie, as we begin to wrap up this conversation, if there's one thing that you really hope administrators take away from our conversation today, or you just want them to know in general, what's your one thing you want to leave them with?
Yeah, I think, again, I would have to really lean into just being present. And I think, I read something the other day that said, like, invest what you expect. If we are expecting certain things, and we have from our staff, and we have set, at the beginning of the year, everybody sets these expectations, right? But how are we as administrators keeping a pulse on it? And as much as we want to say, like, that maybe that's not my role. Maybe that's more of the teacher's role. Maybe I just need to be visible in the discipline aspect of it all. Absolutely not. Right now, more than ever, our teachers are craving that instructional leadership. They are. And again, that does not mean you have to know every content area, but you have to understand what makes students learn, right? What does that look like? What's the difference between content and instruction? What is good delivery of instruction look like? And you get that in your professional learning communities, and you get that from the experts on your campus, your teachers. So lean into them, trust them, listen to them, and support them the best that you can, because at the end of the day, it starts with you, the leader.
I love that. So, Valerie, if people want to connect with you and learn more about you and all the work that you're doing, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, so I am on LinkedIn at Valerie Arechiga, and then I am on Instagram at Valerie Arechiga 24. Facebook, Valerie Arechiga, and then I believe Twitter is the same thing, Valerie Arechiga. And then you can also find me on the thinkingnation.org website.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Valerie, for being a guest today. Thank you, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of the TEPSA Talk Podcast. And we'll see you again next week.